Well, it's a hard rain, it's a purple rain. Time to live it and leave.
Hey everybody, it's Mark Finkelpearl. There he is, Jeffrey Himes. This is Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs. Teddy Thompson today. Teddy is a really great artist and interesting guy. He is the son of Richard and Linda Thompson. Richard, of course, a founding member of the Fairport Convention. In the 70s, he and Linda did some albums together that are considered classics. I Want to See the Bright Lights, Shoot Out the Lights, lots of lights in their music. It's always interesting to talk to someone who's in the long shadow of their parents. Jeff, tell folks what they need to know about Teddy and his journey before we throw to the interview here.
Yeah, so Teddy was 7 years old when his parents split up famously during the Shoot Out the Lights tour, and lived with his mom in London while Richard was living mostly in California. And he, he saw his father on vacations and, like a lot of divorced children do, but didn't actually live with him until he was 18 and moved to California to spend some time with his dad. And he became a musician himself, but I think it helped him that he wasn't doing that sort of British folk rock thing that both his parents did, but he was doing this sort of Everly Brothers, Roy Orbison kind of pop, classic pop country kind of music, which he talks a lot about in this interview. And so he had the best of both worlds. He had his own sort of style and sound, but he also had a connection with his parents, who he continued to collaborate with on an occasional basis. So, and that's what we're going to talk about in this interview.
And so here we go. This is the Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs conversation with Teddy Thompson. Hey everybody, we've got Teddy Thompson. Teddy's new record, Never Be the Same, comes out on May 15th, and it's on Royal Potato Family Records. That's an interesting name, Teddy.
Yeah, I didn't come up with it. I promise. It's not my label.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on this show. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about the new album first. And one of the things that struck me is, of course, the album cover illustration where you're present yourself as four different people, sort of a Bruce Springsteen type rocker with a bandana, and the sort of dapper David Bowie guy in a suit, and the sort of louche playboy in the oriental evening gown, and then as a blonde chanteuse. And what it's a very funny record, a funny album cover, but it also seems to speak to the title of Never Be the Same. And can you talk a little bit about how you came up with it and what it sort of says about the songs on the record?
Yeah, I hadn't planned this. I mean, it was after we finished the record, there was the inevitable discussion about, album cover and content and I had this idea. It was really around the idea of making a music video, which is, in this day and age, it's there's budgets are small, and it's always a question of, okay, well, what songs should we make a video for, and how much can we spend? And I had an idea of, instead of making one video, of spending the same money and making 4 or 5 clips, essentially. So 30-second videos, because that's the media landscape we live in. So is anybody really watching 30 seconds of more than 30 seconds of anything? So that's how it came about. And what that entailed was basically just spending one day. That's the amount of time we had. So I borrowed a friend's house upstate, the lovely Jenny Moldau, who I've worked with. She lives in a big house upstate. So she lent us her lovely house, and we basically went up there with the intention primarily of making these 5 video clips. And I came up with the different outfits to dress in that would be appropriate for the songs and some kind of concept of how to do it. But it was very, very, low budget and quick, and I did it all myself, and with the photographer and guy was great. But so what happened is we'd do the video, play the song. I would lip sync to the video maybe 2 or 3 times maximum. We don't have time to do anything else. A couple of different looks, dance around, whatever. And we did the whole song just because we figured that would make sense, and we just picked 30-second clip. And then when we finished with each song, we had a stills setup, so just a blank, a camera and a wall behind. And we would, while I was in that costume, we would go and quickly take some stills, and I literally 5 minutes maximum, just pose, and then quickly change and do the next thing. So it was born from limitations and not having a lot of time and money to spend. And then once we'd done all of that, when we got all of these pictures and they were all laid out together, they looked so great, together as this kind of tiled look, and that's how we came up with the cover. So I listened to the song, I went back and thought about the song, let's say "Come Back," for example, which is where I'm in drag and wearing a dress and a wig, and just thought about, how could I put this across? How could I play a character that would make sense for the song? Sometimes exactly what I was thinking with the song, but in a case like that, I wasn't writing the song from a woman's point of view, but I just thought, playing dress up, it's an obvious thing to do is to do one in drag, and I was like, actually, this song would work really well from a woman's perspective.
Right.
Why not? And play up to that. So yeah, I was just, and then other ones, like the game where I'm running around with a tennis racket, was just like, what else could I do? I have tennis gear. I play tennis, so let's do one where I'm running around swinging a tennis racket. That was as far as we got because we had such limited time and money.
And how does that sort of link up with this sort of concept of, never being the same, and sort of, the different sides of a person, whether it's you or an imagined narrator? Maybe you could talk a little bit about, to the extent this is autobiographical and to the extent that it's not autobiographical.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the extension, what I'm not mentioning is obviously then the title of the record also was the last thing that I came up with. So we had done all of this, and I had dressed up in all these outfits and become a different person. And then I was searching around for an album title and not really having one. And then when it came to typing out the lyrics for the for the booklets and the artwork, I read them again and was struck by that being quite a theme, and then was struck by the fact that I dressed up as all these different people. So there's a lot of unconscious things happening there, and but that's me all over. I'm not the most intentional. I usually realize that I'm doing something as I'm doing it, or possibly afterwards. So yeah, but there's a lot of that in the songwriting, and there's not just literally the words that I say, which I do. I think I say "never be the same" more than once in different songs. But the attitude, the point of view is very much of either, and a lot of it is either change or the lack thereof. My penchant for repetition and doing things the same way is strong, and it's something I have to fight against and try to break out of. But we all get set in our ways, and it can be a struggle for some of us to not give in to that.
And how did that play out in the songwriting and recording for this song? How are you, trying not to be repetitive in this album?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think that's trying not to be repetitive musically is is a lifelong quest for any musician. But it's a sort of odd juxtaposition of trying to be yourself, which is, you probably have a certain style and you want to be authentically yourself and not try to do something that's not you. And at the same time, you are trying to not exactly repeat yourself all the time. So there's sort of, a happy medium of trying to marry those two seemingly opposing goals.
And so this album is your first album new of your own material in 6 years. And are the songs from all over that 6 years, or were they in a recent spurt of writing?
They're over the last few years. I'm not a prolific songwriter in the sense that I just don't finish everything, and I would classify myself as a very lazy songwriter.
Mhm.
So I don't, I play all the time, and I always have songs on the go, as I would put it, a batch, a few, and in various states of completion. And then I usually get to the point where I have maybe five, and then that feels like, wow, that's almost half a record. And then I start to try and take it a bit more seriously and try and finish some of those songs, and also try to think about what, speaking of not repeating yourself, I also
Mhm.
start to think about what the songs are like, not necessarily lyrically, because as I said, I tend to sort of just let that do whatever it wants, but perhaps, rhythmically and tempo wise, to think about, okay, well, what do I need to make? Do I need
Mhm.
to more up tempo songs to make another record? Are these all downers, or are they all in waltz time or something?
Mhm.
Do I need to? Usually not. Usually, like I better write a song that's in three.
Right.
So yeah, then you start to sit down and do the work part, which is, I hate that part, but that's what we all hate, doing the work. Do
Well,
we?
talk a little bit more about finishing.
Yeah.
When you're working on a song, if you don't have a deadline, you can tinker, 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 and say, oh, it doesn't, it's good, but it doesn't feel quite right, or whatever. But what does finishing mean for you as a songwriter?
Well, deadline's really important. So, I mean, I tend to try to impose a deadline on myself, which usually is in the form of the recording process.
Hmm.
So, I usually try to put that in place when I'm about 70% there with the
Hmm.
songs, and hopefully that time is a couple of months down the road. The recording, doing it in the studio. I still do everything in a studio. I don't record at home, and I like to play with other human beings and do it the old-fashioned way.
Hmm.
So that thing obviously gives me the deadline, and then I have to finish them.
And what happens in those last few months to
It just becomes a little bit stressful, and but it's also, you get into a different headspace. I think I'm really bad. I'm not a self-starter, and so I don't do well in job interviews. And I really need that deadline to force me into a place where I have to complete the homework. Because it does feel like the work. So I mean, I think if you're writing songs, there's different stages. There's the nice inspirational part where you come up with something that you like and some kind of hook or maybe some melody. And then, as I say, I have the songs on the go, and I pick up the guitar all the time, and I make some progress. And I also make a lot of progress in my head, just without an instrument. I tend to write a lot um, on, on the subway or whatever, on the bus.
but is that both music and words?
Mostly the music, mostly the form.
Really?
It's more like it just, once you're working something, it plays in your head and things start to fall into place as far as it feeling like a verse, chorus, bridge thing.
Can you give an example off the new record?
Um, no, because I can't remember any of the songs. It's amazing.
Well, let me jump in and ask you then, because one of the tracks that I really love on the new record is "So This Is Heartache."
Oh yeah.
And that to me, it strikes me, it's a very soulful number. And I'm wondering about your relationship to soul, whether it might be older American soul, or the more of the sort of the neo soul movement that's happened in the last 25 years. I'm talking about, Daptone Records and Sharon Jones and Charles Bradley, but also in England, there's a lot of ska associated with neo soul as well. Are you do you like that stuff? Do you listen to that stuff? Is that something that perhaps a track like "So This Is Heartache" might come from?
I think nothing new. Nothing that I do comes from anything new. I would say very little of it. That's not most of it. I got very early on. I was sort of I was going to say trapped, but in the best possible way in this period of music from really 1955 to 1966 or something. And I was American music, and that's what I was into and obsessed. When I was 10 years old in England, in London, I only wanted to hear Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly and the Everly Brothers, and that was it. And then I moved on to Hank Williams, and then I didn't get into the 60s until I was 13 or 14. I didn't want to know about the 60s. So, and it kind of stops there. And I do listen to contemporary music, but not that much. And there's something about the stuff that you start out with that really sets you, that really is formative, and that stuff is formative for me. So when it comes to that song, I mean, the song is very, as you say, it's very sort of 60s soul. It's very Stax. The
Hmm.
recording is very Stax. But again, not the most intentional, self-aware songwriter. Not for a moment when I was writing that. I have no idea why I started playing that particular, um, you know, chord form, structure, or the or that feel, that classic, kind of soul feel
Uh,
with the plucked strings. Um, but so it just, but I've heard it a million times, obviously, but it's just in there somewhere. And I don't think to myself, oh, I'm going to write a soul song. And I didn't even think to myself, let's record it that way. It's just when we got in there with the band and with the producer, it just seemed like the natural thing to do.
So
it
when you
seemed
were
like
10
the
years old and you were, everything was 1950 to 1955 to maybe 1960, were you an anachronism among your friend group? I mean, your friends
Oh
at the
yeah.
time were, tell us about that because they must have been listening to Green Day and, I don't know what.
No, no, no. I'm much older than that. This was the mid '80s. They were listening to Adam Ant, maybe, and God, I don't even know, Yazoo. What was in the charts? Yeah, I mean, luckily at that age, or at least what was going on, the school I went to and the world I lived in, nobody was really into music yet. But I was at 10 and 11, but it was not a big part of anybody's life then. That seems to have changed a bit. I don't know why that is, but kids that old weren't into music when I was young. That came later. That was more of a teenage thing. So, yeah, I just didn't talk about it because it didn't, and thankfully it didn't come up much because we were talking about football and maybe some girls.
did you ever have um, like most kids go through a thing where they find a music that's their music and not their parents' music, and your parents of course are famous, but like famous or not, you want to have a music that's not your parents' music. And how did you ever have was this your I mean your dad especially was Chuck Berry, everybody's kind of guy too. So I mean, um, how did you stake claim to music that was yours?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I didn't have that exact experience of wanting of finding something that was really my own and wasn't theirs but it was a version of that. So yes, I latched on to something that was very different from the music that they made, but they were the ones that exposed me to that music. Because where else does a 10-year-old in London hear the Everly Brothers in 1985?
Right.
In the car. And my dad had the tape in the car, and he had the Chuck Berry tape, and maybe not Chuck Berry, Everly's definitely. And I think he was, like many parents on car journeys, he was looking for something that his kids would like that he could also not want to blow his brains out listening to. And so I'm sure he had to go sit through some bad kid music for a few years. But then he played some stuff, and I just remember, liking that. And so he probably latched onto that, like, oh, great, I can live with that. Let's play more of that. And that did have an effect. But it was probably a way for me to, get into some music and and explore the musical feelings I was having
Hmm.
in a different path to theirs, even though it's something
Right.
that they liked. It wasn't something that they sounded like.
Now you've talked a lot about you know, the Everly Brothers being an epiphany. So your first musical epiphany. Can you remember when that happened, or just
Yeah,
circumstances?
yeah, it was in the car, in the back seat of the Volvo, on probably a family trip to, I say family, it was just my dad. My parents were divorced by then. We used to take trips up to Scotland in the car, and I think it was probably one of those long trips. And yeah, I remember hearing it, and I think, if I'm honest about it, I think because me and my older sister would have been in the back seat, and I think what we liked was the sort of up-tempo kind of sing-along ones, like "Wake Up Little Susie." I remember,
Hmm.
we sort of bopped our heads along to those songs, but I think because I had musical leanings, I guess, or the beginnings of them. I think I heard something in that music that was a little bit deeper, that affected me a little bit more deeply than just bopping my head, and it was really just it was like having the musical light switch turned on, and I thought it was like, oh, this is music. Oh, I like this. Okay, if this is music, then play on.
So
What
on this new record, there's in the press notes you talk about um, Roy Orbison as an influence and Nick Lowe and the Everlys, and seems to be that one thing that those three artists have in common is that they have sort of country roots, but they sort of blended them with sort of more of a pop rock kind of thing. The Everly Brothers started out as a country brothers duo, and then you know met up with help with Chet Atkins and the Bryants. They became this sort of pop, you know, smash success. And Roy Orbison's the same thing. He's had that Texas thing, but he had that sort of operatic thing too.
Mm.
And is there something about that sort of country sort of halfway turned into rock and roll that you like so much that it seems like the arrangements on this new record sort of reflect that?
Yeah, I think that's very astute. I'm not sure I'd really considered that before, but I think I followed that path. I have, yeah, as you say, the Everlys, the records we were listening to at the time, that was considered straight ahead pop music. It was, that was there's no fiddles or pedal steel on those records. They were trying
Mm.
to make them into pop acts. But of course, to our ears, and because of the way they sang, it does have a country base to it. And I think that was formative. And I think that, after I listened to this, there was a lot of I was also extremely into just country music after that. Um, that was
Even
my
as
next.
a teenager.
Yeah, that was my next move, was real
Uh-huh.
country, after the sort of 50s rock and roll stuff. But as you say, the Everlys certainly had that flavor, and a lot of them, I wouldn't even, it's not even totally out of the realm of possibility that's to say that Chuck Berry had a bit of country in it
Oh,
too. Like
definitely.
all of that stuff, that was what rock and roll was the blending of these things. So, and country was one of those ingredients.
Yeah, like Maybelline was a rewrite of Bob Wills' Ida Red.
Ah, yes, there you go.
Yeah. So, and even the stack stuff that we were talking about a minute ago, there's a uh, sort of an affinity, hidden affinity, as you will, to old school soul and old school country.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the stuff I listen to, and I listen to. I probably didn't go so far down the soul route as maybe the things we've just talked about, but I did. I mean, like any teenager who's crazy into music, once I found, Otis Redding and stuff. I listened to all that stuff to death, as a teenager, especially. Like, and then I was at a school where people were in bands, and other people wanted to listen to Otis Redding and Sam Cooke and all these people. I mean, I listened to and that stuff that you hear, when you're a teenager, you remember in a way that you never do again. You really know what I'm talking about. So everybody should, like, you remember every inflection of that music in a way that is unbelievable. Like it's retained completely. So, yeah, I mean, I would say I devoured all of that music too, and tons of blues. For things that I don't. Do I sound like Son House? No, but did I listen to it? Oh my God, yes. So, that's what shapes us. But it's not necessarily, of course, it's not necessarily a direct sonic comparison. It's just part of your experience, your education.
The record you did before this one is My Love of Country,
Yeah.
which was, old great country music songs that you covered and did your own way. Uh, and is it fair to say that you didn't write any of the songs on that one, and then on this one you wrote all the songs, but it seems like there's a carryover from one project to the next.
Yeah, I mean, probably it doesn't seem that way so much to me, but I still, when you're the singer and you have a certain sound, everything sounds pretty much like you. As artists, we think we're doing these radically different projects, but to a lot of people, it's like, yeah, you sound like you singing a song. It's not, you haven't reinvented the wheel there. So, yeah, it doesn't, I think there's carryover just in mostly in my voice, and but the other big variable there is that it's the same producer, the great David Mansfield, who produced both of those records and is such an exceptional musician and producer and human being that his sensibility definitely is felt through both of those records. Yeah.
I'm really fascinated by the differentiation in your mind, if there is one, between the UK and the US musically, because your father has lived in the US a long time. You're living in the US, but yet you're still very much an Englishman as well. Was there any we were talking to Pat Sansone in Wilco, and he was telling us how he was growing up in Mississippi, but he was in his head living in London in 1967 as a teenager. And then he met people like Robert Plant, who were dreaming of growing up in Mississippi the way that he was.
Mm.
Is there any juxtaposition there for you between the two countries and their musical similarities and differences?
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think so many English artists um, dreamt as kids of being Americans, basically being obsessed with American music, especially of a certain era. And I think it goes the other way. You meet so many British music, such an influence on so many people who went the other way, who were from the other place. So yeah, I mean. I basically, I had this. I basically started was like a kid. I was listening to the Everly Brothers and Buddy Holly and Chuck Berry and Eddie Cochran and all these people. And I was also obsessively reading Archie comics. And because then this was something you couldn't get in England, but because my dad was married to an American, we used to go to LA for holidays, and we had this sort of immersion in this American world. And I really conflated 50s American music and Archie comics, which is about right. I mean, they were from
Yeah,
that era. And
yeah.
because I looked a bit like Archie, I was like the little sort of awkward red-headed kid, which is having red hair or ginger hair in England was like so uncool. But he was the center, he was the protagonist in these comic books, and I had sort of superimposed the music that I liked onto these comic books, and I basically found this little world that I wanted to live in, and I wanted to be Archie, and I wanted to listen to the jukebox.
Can you talk a little bit more about David Mansfield and his role in these two albums, and what does he do in a studio that enables you to achieve what you want better than you might on your own?
What doesn't he do would be a shorter answer. Yeah, he's just a fantastic musician. First is how I knew him. He's a multi-instrumentalist, plays everything really well, pedal steel, but also viola and violin. And he has some classical training. His dad was a classical musician, so he comes from, and then David was in Bob Dylan's band when he was 17. So he had these two, the classical music world and then the rock and roll and folky and country world. So he can straddle both of those worlds, which first of all is quite unusual. because often classically trained musicians can't really do the other thing. They can't really improvise and just jam, if you will, or play along. And often, rock and roll musicians can't read and write music and do string arrangements and stuff, but he can do both, and very, very well. So he enabled me really most of all just to be the singer, which is a great freeing thing when you have a producer who can take care of everything else. But on top of that, he could play everything pretty much himself. So it was a very fast way of working in the studio. So we cut the basic tracks with the drummer and bass player and David and me did that. And then when we went in to add things to it, often when you record that way, you'll get into that situation. You'll say, okay, these sound great. So what we need is, we should get someone in to play, like the strings on this, or should we have a string arrangement, or should we have, the pedal steel? But everything that we wanted, he could just do right there. So we'd say, so he'd go, yeah, I could probably do that, and like would play the most incredible, guitar solo or pedal steel, or even stuff that he didn't play. Like I used to like playing piano parts. I'm like, I didn't know he could do everything. So it was incredibly satisfying to work that way. And then the added bonus of being able to elevate proceedings by writing a horn arrangement, for example, or doing, he would write a string arrangement like in his head a lot of the time on some of these songs, and then just play it in multi-track, and it would sound like an orchestra. So he's just the most fantastic person to work with. He's also a great human being.
And you
While
recorded
we're-
at his,
go ahead.
you recorded at his studio, right?
Yeah, we recorded at his studio. He has a room in a bigger studio, so which enables you to use the bigger studio that he has a sort of share in, which is a common practice, and then he has a smaller room where you can do the overdubs.
I was going to ask, while we're talking about the studio, what your relationship is to gear, and do you care? Are you the guy who obsesses over the differences between a D18 and a J45, or are you not? Do you have a guitar collection? What's that all about?
Well,
Uh-oh, we're going to see something.
The short answer is no, I don't care at all. But then I did just buy a D18.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
My first old Martin.
Fantastic. And you got it in New York?
I got it in sent to me. There's this guitar guy who everybody sort of follows, and he's on social media and stuff. But he's sort of he's so trustworthy and has such a good, he knows so much that people are willing, like me, to buy guitars unseen and just which is what I did with this. Yeah.
What's his name, or is that a secret?
No, it's not a secret. His name is Jake Eddy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've heard of him. EDDY.
Yeah. So he's great. He has a home run vintage guitars. I think he just opened a brick and mortar place down in, I think it's West Virginia. But yes, very high quality stuff, and I recommend checking his stuff out. But other than that purchase, no, I'm not really a gear guy. Definitely not studio gear, and not really instrument wise. I'm not a collector or a aficionado of any of these things. I don't really have that part of the brain that likes to do the technical stuff, and I find that it messes with the creative thing that I do have. So I love to have somebody else who knows much more than I do that stuff. The engineers.
Taking care of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you going to tour behind this new record? Tell us about those plans.
Yeah, I'm going to the UK for most of June's, which is where I'll start, and then I will be all over the US for the rest of the year. Yeah, check out I guess teddythompson.net is my website. There's tour dates on that.
And will that be with a band or by yourself?
A bit of both. Most of the stuff in the US will be by myself,
Okay.
because this country is too big to be carrying around musicians.
Yeah. Jeff,
So
you were about to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, a lot of the songs on this new record and on a lot of your records actually are about relationships that haven't worked out, and either you are glad they didn't work out, or you regret that they didn't work out, or you hope they'll get back together, and why, again, I asked you earlier about how much this stuff is autobiographical, how much it's not, and but why are those sort of little romantic dramas thing you keep coming back to?
I sort of feel like everybody does that. I'm always a bit surprised when I feel like I get singled out as why do you keep writing about these heartbreaking moments? But I thought that's what everybody did. I didn't know there
Mhm.
was another way to do it. I thought that's what the job was, is that you zero in on these moments and you exploit them for creative output. And I don't think I'm doing anything particularly different than anybody else, but um, I guess I take it as a compliment if I think about it, but I think maybe a lot of it has to do with the sound of my voice too. I think I have a sort of plaintive quality that maybe makes me sound um, more stricken than most.
High and
The
But
other part,
lonesome.
yeah, yeah.
the other,
Sometimes some high and lonesome means something very different to me, and is not far from the truth either.
so the other part of songwriting that rarely gets talked about when critics and artists talk to each other is melody, and especially on this album, there's some really beautiful chorus, hooks. And in the songwriting process, how do you recognize those things when they come along, and how do you like refine them and make the most of them? And they do.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a bit of a mystery. I think there's not really a really good answer to that, except that I think I think a bit of having some sort of melodic gift or ability is just you have it or you don't, and you know sometimes you have it because you've ingested a lot of good influences over the years, and I think that's true for me. I was exposed to a lot of great music early on, and very different styles. I was, my both my parents have Catholic taste in music and exposed me to some really um, disparate and wonderful things. And so it's just, you are what you eat to a certain extent. You get a good diet and a varied diet, and then you're more able to put out varied and interesting um, work. But also, I think when it comes to melody, that you recognize the moments and refine them with practice. And I think that listening to things that I did very early on, that I think I had good instincts and there were um, good natural moments in there where I came up with some good melodies. But I think now I I know it when I'm doing it, and I can maybe exploit it a bit more, and maybe try to add to it a bit more without, again, without wanting to be somebody other than I am. I think you learn some tricks to make the melody stand out even more. Some of it technical things like just having like a half bar or something before a chorus to make it more immediate, or major to minor things, trying to passing chords and things.
Hmm. So, you know, your dad's on one track on this record, Make Up Your Mind, and uh, he usually shows up one way or the other as a writer or a player or something on a lot of your records. And you know, why is that connection important to you, even though you make records that don't particularly sound like his?
Yeah, I mean it's important, I think it was important to me when I started out, because I think I just, was craving some connection. And, I didn't grow up with my dad. I'm a child of divorce, like so many of us. Um, but I just happened to be, in this musical field, and so did he. I mean, not happened to be. Of course, there's a lot of Oedipal, um, you know, things going on there. Like, did I become a musician because I wanted to, or because I thought, that was what I was supposed to do or because I wanted to be my dad. There's all that. But putting that to one side, once I had decided to do it, it was nice to have that shared thing with him as a young adult because I hadn't spent much time with him growing up. And so it became a nice thing that we could do together sometimes. I think he liked it, for that reason too. I was maybe a little bit conflicted when I was younger because, of course, you want to be your own person and you want to be your own artist, but not tremendously because I was benefiting from having quite a different musical style to them. So I didn't feel a direct comparison. I also didn't have to suffer from them being famous. So there was nobody in the music business, like the business of selling the records who cared about who my parents were at all. In fact, it was best not to tell them because if they were worried about me having similar record sales to them, they would have run a mile. So I was lucky in that respect. It wasn't crushing. It was more just this thing that could be dipped into, and then it became sort of a tradition for me and my dad to play on each other's records. It was a nice thing that we could connect periodically and try to do. So we try and do it, to this day.
What about the
And you've
notion, though, of the difficulties of the creative class, whether you're writing or you're painting or you're writing, songs? Were your parents, when they figured out what you wanted to do, did they say run for the hills? This is a crazy business? Or were they encouraging?
They were encouraging. I think it was, I think it's a difficult moment, probably. I can see it in retrospect. I think it was probably, if it was now, I think they would tell me to run from the hills, run for the hills, run from the hills. Definitely not from.
Both.
Running
Just
from
do
the
both.
What are you running from the hills for?
Go
There's
for and
nothing.
from.
Don't run from those hills. Yeah, I mean, because it's now, but at the time, it was still, there was still money in the music business and a good chance of, yeah, why not give it a go? You have a fair shot. And so they basically just didn't say one way or the other. They just let me do what I wanted to do, which I think is probably the best way to go. And they were just supportive, and because I had already decided I was going to do that.
And the other yoke that creative people have saddled on their shoulders is the yoke of compulsion, right? I'm going to do this because there's no plan B, and I don't want there to be a plan B. I am compelled to be an artist. Was that you as well?
I don't really subscribe to that. I'm not sure that that's really true for the majority of people. I think that's just kind of a bit of a fantasy, a myth.
Tell me why. Tell me why you
Well,
think
because
that.
I think it's just I think because most of the people that I've met that have that attitude are the people who are not very good, frankly. Not naming names, but people, it's sort of that attitude of like, I must do this, and the people who I must perform. And there's people you get out there and you're like, oh God, must you? Just, as a generalization, I find that the most talented, interesting artists, I find the ones who are riddled with self-doubt, who feel like half the time like they shouldn't be there at all, wish they'd gone to law school, wish they had something else to do. Really, like those are the interesting people to me, and it's a shame. It's a shame, unfortunately, the climate we're in now is not conducive to those people being successful. It's conducive to the other people who are like, I'm so wonderful, I must do this. Who will go on social media and be like, I'm so wonderful, look at me, I must. So I think there's a small, I think there are those people. I don't mean to suggest that they don't exist. I think there are the really exceptional, top tier, top part of the pyramid artists throughout history who are just undeniable and would do it in a stadium, or would be singing in the pub if that was the only option, or any time in history would be making their art. But that's not most of us, and those people are the ones that we look up to often as being I think they're the exceptions to the rule.
We over the years you've collaborated with and had friendships with a lot of other children of, you know, musicians famous to one degree or another. You know, you mentioned Jenny Meldar earlier in this interview, Rufus Wainwright, of course, Sean Lennon, Harper Simon. And is there something that, you know, that brings you together, that you know, you're the only people who understand what you're going through, and are you able to learn from different ways of coping with that from each other?
A little bit. I think it was. I'm not sure it was that meaningful for me in that respect, except because I don't think I was going through anything that was difficult for me to understand or navigate with
Hmm.
that dynamic, as I said. So for me, it was more about it was more that I just Rufus was the person that I became close friends with, the first other person who was had similar family musical history and parentage, and he was a little bit further ahead in his journey, and he, speaking of those undeniable people, I would say is one of those few. And he was inspiring to me because he was a couple of years older. He had this record deal. He was already so himself and sounded like a fully fledged artist at a young age, whereas I was just sort of fumbling around and dipping a toe in. And so for me, he was an example. And because he came from such a similar background, he was an example that I could believe in and believe that I could emulate, at least, you know, career wise, you know, not exactly the same kind of music. And then the other people that I met who had, you know, similar musician parents were often through him, because he was much more of a social being than I, and somebody that sought out these people and met them. And so but I didn't feel a particular kinship with any of those people, as far as their life experiences, because many of those people had really quite a burden of the famous parents in a way that was not relatable to me. You know, Harper Simon or Sean Lennon. That's quite the level of fame. I didn't have to relate to that.
Right, right.
Okay. Well, Teddy, we're mindful of your time. We've had you almost an hour, but let me just do something where we can wrap up here. Jeff, do you have anything else before we
Well,
do
yeah,
a
can you
little?
talk a little bit about the 2014 album, Family, where,
Yeah.
you know, your mom and dad and sister were all involved, and you know why, you know, and you sort of were the sort of ringmaster of the whole circus, and you know, the sort of motivation and how did it turn out, I guess is what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I had really just was having a bit of a, you know, I was going to say midlife crisis, but that wasn't a midlife crisis. I know that wasn't a midlife crisis because it's more now. So I recognize that was nothing. Being, you know, in your early 40s, that's young. 50, oh shit, that's a midlife crisis. Okay. But I was going through a difficult time personally, and I had gone to analysis for the first time, which, you know, I recommend. It's a very interesting, you know, if nothing else, I just recommend it as an anthropological experience. It's very interesting to just learn you know, the language and what you know, understand sort of what you've been doing your whole life,
Mhm.
like what is it I'm doing here. But I was looking back on a lot of things, family things, and understanding, you know, as with all of us, these are the things that form the things that happen when you're a kid are really formative and really set you on a path, and
Mhm.
often set you on a path of repeating behaviors that are not that healthy. And so I was thinking a lot about family and things that happened when I was a kid, and how that drove me one way or the other. And it was just quite an emotional, retrospective time in that sense. And I had this idea to make this record. Again, I was not particularly aware of this connection at the time. I was just like, hey, we should do this. We've never done this. And, you know, I think I got away with it because I was someone in my family that people didn't feel that they could say no to for some reason, for various reasons. Like nobody really hated me at the time, and I was on fairly good terms with everybody. So I was a good, you know, conductor of this particular orchestra or circus, and I did it, and then you know it was interesting, and it was really interesting because I basically said, look, let's make it really easy. I just emailed people and said, all you have to do is write 2 songs and then just record them wherever you are, at home or go into a studio, and then everybody can play on them. Like you don't have to be in a room together. was my sales pitch. Um, and that's how it started out, and it was really interesting because everybody approached it quite differently. You know, it was interesting what kind of songs they wrote and if they had anything to do with family, or if they would just, you know, oh, here's a couple of songs I'm not using, kind of approach. um, but then I, you know, in the process of then hearing the songs back and then singing on them and playing on them and then trying to do a couple of shows. We did some shows. I sort of, you know, like had a bit of an emotional breakdown a couple of times. Like I'm completely, you know, hit, you know, upside the head, where I just completely like, you know, was like bawling, and and realized that, and then we started to do things like this. You know, I had to do interviews for it, and I think
Mhm.
it wasn't until that part of the process that I realized that I was making this record to get my family back together. It was like I was trying to literally get like repair the break from you know 40 years ago in some bizarre twisted way. I was like, I can fix it all. I can make it. I can push
And
it back
just to be
together.
clear, was this during your analysis or
It was.
before or
I was.
after?
It was after, but no, I was still doing it. So I was very much in
Right,
that
right. So
mindset.
it ties together, connects dots.
Yeah, it really does. And but it's also, you know, I've had this experience. I mean, I'll round this all off by saying, you know, something that I think I've probably said 2 or 3 times in this hour, which is like, I don't know what I'm doing when I'm doing it. I'm so incredibly lacking in self-awareness, and or like I'm dreaming or something. Or I'm so lacking in I'm just not intent in I don't have the intent. And then when I'm doing it, or very often when I'm talking about, like, I have this experience of doing interviews afterwards or looking at the song. I'm like, I haven't looked at that song since I did it. What are you talking about? And then if I read the words, I'm like, oh my God, look what I was doing, look what I was saying, look what I was trying to tell myself, I guess. But so like right over my head until you know, after the fact much of the time.
Well, Teddy,
That-
it's commendable that you're aware that you're not self-aware.
That's right. That's right. That's a good way of spinning it.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me ask you one more thing before we go. You
Sure.
know, as I mentioned earlier, I spoke to you when your mom did that Fashionably Late record, which was a big deal because she hadn't made a record in 17 years and wasn't clear that she ever would make a record again. And you seem to be, you co-wrote a lot of it. You were on the album a lot. And she's told me at that time that um, she felt she was sort of got interested again because your debut album struck her in a way. Says, you know, that's something. I remember how much fun and rewarding that was, and I want to do that again. And can you remember that time and her sort of coming out of you know, the illness with her vocal cords and that sort of self-imposed retirement and emerging again, and sort of say what she's up to artistically now.
Yeah, I remember it's interesting to look at it now, because at the time I was, you know, I was quite wrapped up in myself, you know, and my beginning of my career and wanting to be my own person, my own artist. And then I was a little bit conflicted because then I had my mum asking me to help her with these folk songs, and I was like, oh, I don't know if do I want to be doing that? You know, but do I want to be that? But I can't say no because it's my mum. So I remember feeling a bit sort of a bit conflicted about it at the time, and I think I didn't really know why she was doing it now. But yes, it's interesting that she was, you know, had was sort of seeing me do it and thought maybe she would get back into it. But I don't know. It's my mother and I have a very close Oedipal connection, and we're sort of we're one of those mothers and sons that are kind of in love with each other rather than just loving each other, and it's like way too close and and over the top. And I mean, it's great. There's worse problems to have, right? But I think we sort of we overlap and cross in ways that maybe most mothers and sons don't. And then when you add in the music thing, it's then there's this creative element too. But I I think when fast forwarding to the record that she just put out a couple of years ago, which was when other people singing her songs, where I took on a similar role in helping her. I realized, again, this is one of these things after the fact, that I was I was trying, what your mum does for you in your life and when you're a child is, and what my mum specifically did for me, maybe a little bit too much and into adulthood, was just do it for me. She wanted so much to help me and to make things okay for me that she would often step in and like, I'll just do it for you. I'll do it. Don't worry. And maybe I didn't learn some lessons that I should have by doing it myself. And then I realized that, when I doing that record and more doing the last record that she did, is that I could finally do the same thing for her. Can't sing anymore, so don't worry, Mum, I'll do it for you. And that's a lovely feeling.
And a gift. What a gift.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, the new record is Never Be the Same. It's on Royal Potato Family and comes out May 15th. So by the time people are watching this, it'll be available. Are you doing how many different formats? Are you doing a vinyl drop on this one?
There is vinyl. There's black vinyl, and then there's also a limited edition blue vinyl, which
Ooh,
is
I'm getting that one. I want that
yeah,
one. Great.
yeah.
Teddy Thompson, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Great to talk.
Thanks, Teddy.
Thank you.
That was really interesting. How are you feeling about that conversation?
Yeah, I was surprised at how open he was about, all his family stuff, all his musical stuff. It was, you don't usually get artists to be quite so open. And so it was a real privilege to be part of that.
And it's not easy. We talked about other children of singer-songwriters who are quite famous, and it has to be a long shadow. It's got to be even. He talked about there being a difference between Sean Lennon and Harper Simon, but his parents are revered
Right.
and considered living legends. And
Yeah, Arlo Guthrie once told me that, being the child of a famous artist, entertainer, helps you get in the door. But once you're in the door, you're on your own. And I think that's true for all these people. So.
Yeah. Well, Never Be the Same, Royal Potato Family, Teddy Thompson. It was great to talk to him. And we will see you next time on Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs. We thank all of our subscribers, all of your support. Keep the comments coming, and we'll keep the lines wide open.
And also, don't forget that we put out a blog every Thursday, the essays and album reviews and our writing about popular music. So don't miss out on that.
Yeah. Thank you for that too. We noticed that that's popular, that our subscribers open those up, and we're going to keep them coming. Thank you. We'll see you next time. You happy?
Yep.
Okay, I'm happy. Let me stop recording and then we can talk.